They say no, it was their dog. They got pregnant by
Are we
their
for
other
them or
dog.
against them?
No vaccinations
Depends on
on
what we're doing
anybody.
with
Yep, I don't know any of this until
So
this
is today
morning
the
when I
day,
get a call from
Councilmember
my
Scanlon?
manager and says,
Pardon?
Is today the day?
Which day?
The day of your birth?
Happy
Feliz cumpleaños.
That's
Sunday.
Sunday? All right.
Close enough. Are we gonna see him Sunday?
There's a cake in there. That's
I
fine.
said-
All right, we're on TV. Let's go ahead
I'll tell
and
you
get
what.
this study session started. Our city council conference today, the topic is carports and amendments to our ordinance addressing this important infrastructure issue. We have a presentation from Mrs. Hudson.
Yes, welcome. So we've been, staff has been working on the carport ordinance since about 2014. And we've gone back and forth with many discussions about how we can allow or how we can monitor the construction of these carports that extend front of the building. So we've presented an ordinance to you, and which you've got in front of you tonight. I will go over a couple of bullet points I think that are important to outline. So if you have a home and you are extending your carport forward of the main dwelling structure, which would essentially be going in front of the front building setback, the proposed ordinance is requiring that you go to Board of Adjustment for approval for special exception, and this would be allowed in the residential district. So the RE, R1, R1A, R2, 3, RM6, those are listed here in the proposed ordinance. Now, and there's also carport construction guidelines that you would need to follow. Now, if you are locating the carport behind the main dwelling, so essentially meeting the front building setback, you would not have to go to Board of Adjustment for the special exception, but you still need to meet these carport construction guidelines. And of course, if you have any issues for like side yard setbacks or something like that, then of course you would need to go to Board of Adjustment for a variance for that. But as far as extending forward and getting the approval of a special exception from Board of Adjustment, that wouldn't apply to you. Within the general provisions, we have it outlined that carports shall not be used for storage of materials. No more than one carport shall be permitted for each dwelling unit. So for instance, if you had a garage apartment in the back and you wanted to put a carport on there, you'd still be able to do that. We just wanted to make sure that everybody could have protection for their vehicle if they needed it. Of course, we need to get building permits for them, and the grandfathering under G, under 3, General Provisions G, the carports existing as the date of the adoption of this ordinance that do not have a building permit of record shall be considered grandfathered. We wanted to make sure that that was included. Now, there will be some that do have building permits, so those really wouldn't need to fall into that grandfathered category because they've been reviewed and possibly have gotten a variance on record, but we wanted to make sure that we got that in there as well. For the carport construction, we want them located over a paved surface. Gravel driveways may be used as long as they were in existence prior to 1966, and that actually came straight from the current zoning ordinance. We just wanted to include that. That's not a change that's in the current zoning ordinance. And then, of course, we talk about the variance for the side and front yard setbacks. They can ask the Board of Adjustment for a variance for their setbacks. Then we have the design guidelines that we had talked about at a couple of the committee meetings, and what is proposed is that the carports shall use a similar construction material as the principal dwelling structure and have just a similar or a compatible architectural style. No cloth or fabric. And the poles and beams, one of the concerns that we'd heard is that when they have the metal poles or beams that are the support for the structure, those should be covered with some sort of it can even be a hardy board type material that could just wrap those metal poles to make it look more like the main structure that's there. And we want guttering to make sure that we don't have any runoff onto adjacent properties. And then, of course, we have guidelines for carports that are being proposed on corner lots. We want to make sure that we don't run into any site triangle issues causing any hazards or anything like that. So I think that kind of outlines it briefly. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or go over any of the information that's in the ordinance.
Councilmember Hall?
I have a couple of questions on the piece about the carport. A carport should use similar construction materials as the principal dwelling structure. How do we determine that? How do we enforce that? How does that work?
Well, we would look at what they have on site already for their main structure.
Okay.
And that was, we put that in there because of the metal aluminum carports that deteriorate quickly and become a code issue, and then we get calls from the neighbors and everything. So we're really just looking at structures that, I mean, they don't have to be all wood, and we want metal posts to give the support and everything, but we just wanted them to be of a residential construction.
So is that
Appearance.
part of what they present for the building permit process? Okay. Okay. And then on a carport shall not exceed a maximum height of 24 feet. That seems really high. So how did we get to that number?
That may have been in the original one, if it wasn't. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but
Okay.
it may have come from, I can look real quick at the R1 and see. No, it's not 24 feet in R1. I'm really not sure, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I mean, we can reduce it, but, we have, depending on the pitch of what they want, I mean, we could even look at the wall height.
Okay.
I think it's RVs, right?
Oh, it could be.
Okay. Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, this is a combination of several proposed ordinances that have come forward over the years, and so that may be something that was in there previously, so I'm not 100% sure on that.
Okay. Well, that makes some sense.
Could you look into that and email all of us?
Sure.
And the other thing I just wanted to mention was, we have 3 historic districts in Core Norman that are designated with a historic district zoning overlay. And it's my understanding that the historic district zoning overlay is the most restrictive. So in this case, this proposed ordinance, if you're in a historic district, you would be living under the guidelines for the historic district zoning overlay. Is that correct? So in the historic district guidelines, carports are allowed. They do require a certificate of appropriateness, and they cannot be attached to the primary structure, and they have to be located in the rear yard. So just want to make sure I've got that clear.
So they would have to follow those guidelines, and if they are in the rear yard and they did get the COA, then they wouldn't have to go to Board of Adjustment, but they would have to, well, if you've got design guidelines in yours as well, so they would have to meet those.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Are we looking it over? This is an issue that I don't think is a big deal all over town. Maybe it is and you're not hearing about it, but this was one of the first issues I heard about as a council member of Ward 6 in 2016. And we've looked at this several times. Councilmember Holman, as chair of the Community Planning and Transportation Committee, can speak to how many times we've actually looked at it. And Councilmember Holman, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the final product, because you've been here longer than the rest of us have looking at this issue.
Well, I'm very satisfied with what we've put in here. There's when I was running for re-election in February, I did notice in Ward 7 more carports than 2 years before that, and 2 years before that. And I've got some older neighborhoods in Ward 7, and there's always been carports. Some of them are built already to match the structure that they're attached to. And, I think it's hard for me to remember all the concerns that Councilmember Youngman had when he was the chair of the CPT committee when we originally looked at this issue when I first got on council, and I think he had some concerns about it, and so it kind of we didn't end up we couldn't really decide what to do, so we just moved on to some other issues. But and getting it back on, I was reluctant a bit because I was already like, we had so many meetings about carports, I don't know if I can take another one. So, but I have not heard any objections from my residents about this. A couple of my biggest supporters have carports, and I kind of asked them about it in February. I was like, we're looking at this again, and I had no objections. And going over these issues, other than clarifying the 24-foot, I could see it being RVs would make sense. It does say,
Can't be higher than
or the height of the
Yeah.
immediate
Yeah.
adjacent dwelling, whichever is less.
Yeah.
But 24 feet is 3-story building. So
And Jane, how do you feel about the Board of Adjustment? Do you think that's going to overwhelm anybody, or because I was comfortable with that route of review?
I
Same.
don't think it will. We don't have that many. I see some of the building permits that come through. We don't get a lot of carport permits, but I think it's a good move. And then that way we get the notification of the adjacent property owners, and I think that's probably the key in this whole ordinance is getting the notification of the adjacent property owners to make sure that everybody's on board, understanding what the process is. It'll be new, so nobody's really going to be familiar with this, and so it'll be a good thing.
And then adding the construction requirements with the materials, I think, helps address some of the surrounding neighbors' concerns about what's it going to look like in my neighborhood.
and its durability too is a big concern about carport. You can go and I guess it's already prefabricated and you can just throw up and it's made of aluminum. Was concerned that in our high winds and storms in Oklahoma that might get tossed around and become debris, and if they weren't properly anchored to the structure that they're. So I think that was something we really talked about last time for sure. And but I have no objections to what's on here as far as my district goes.
Councilmember Wilson?
So I think I know the answer, but do HOA covenants override this ordinance? Okay. So the only folks that I think in my ward that would object to this would be the ones in the HOAs, so they're probably protected by their covenants. And so I will defer to people in the more urban area on how they want to handle carports, honestly.
That was my thought as well with the RV issue. I know my HOA is like, you cannot have that on your front driveway, even if you had a carport. So I think you're right. There are additional protections with HOAs. Any other questions or comments? Sir, I know that you're here about this issue. Do you have any questions or comments?
Not really. I think everything's been covered so far.
Okay. Councilor Patron.
The only thing I would say about it is there a mechanism in place where I know that when houses are a little closer together, especially if they're not used in the driveway, it causes flooding on either sides of them because water is going to go. So a lot of I've seen
That's
them
the guttering.
placed between like the house and a fence, and they're going to put their boat in there under a carport, like have a gate installed. Well, inevitably the next door neighbor is going to get the water runoff. So I'm just wondering if there's some sort of, I can just see that happening.
Side yard setback.
Well, there is a side yard setback, but more often than not, the carports technically, they ask for a variance to that 5-foot side yard setback. I'll just tell you, right now we have an application actually going forward to Board of Adjustment for a carport. It's not in the front, it's in the back, but he is asking for a variance to the side yard setback. And he's sloping the roof away from his adjacent property owner. So any of that runoff is going to come back on his property. So that could be something, as the design moves forward and they go to Board of Adjustment, we could, I guess we could add something in there that states, I mean, we say guttering, but I mean, we could also add additional information about the design, you know.
Okay, I know my ward particularly doesn't have as many problems with stormwater. In that type, we have issues with stormwater, just not in, close together in that way. So, I don't know, I just wanted to bring that to your all's attention, that that's gonna be in residential neighborhoods.
Councilmember Wilson?
I have a ancillary topic. Is there a guttering ordinance on new homes being built? Is that a thing that we require?
I'm not sure. That's in chapter 5, and I don't deal with that very much, but I don't think that there is, because I see new homes without gutters.
My new home doesn't have gutters. I was just
Right.
kidding.
I don't think that there is.
Yeah, there should be. That'd be a great way to address some stormwater,
To direct
probably.
it.
All right, seeing no other questions or comments, Jane, what's the next process, step in the process to finalize these changes?
I'm going to get an email out to you about the height. I'm going to go back and look at the ones prior to see if that, I'm sure that 24 feet was in there, because I don't remember adding something like that. And I guess if there's a concern with that 24 feet, we can make those changes and then bring it forward. I can get comments back from you to see what you're comfortable with as far as the height of the structure. They could always ask for a variance through Board of Adjustment for height as well, if we brought it down, so they could get a variance there as well. But aside from that, we would have to go back and go to Planning Commission and then bring it forward to City Council. So I just need to get that information back to you and see what you think about the height.
So next couple months? Wonderful. All right. No other comment? Thank you so much, Jane.
Yay.
All right.